Maria, dear colleagues worldwide, thank you for joining us during this webinar of the series of INSAS, in this case, in a series devoted to the modeling. And today we have two respected and well-known presenters. And as well, we have the help, as always, of Dr. Maria Kuniskova, that will record and convey the questions and make resume. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the two speakers. Professor Dirk Rijls is Emeritus Professor at the KU Leuven University in Belgium. In the frame of irrigation projects, he lived and worked for 7 years in Africa, mainly Algeria and Senegal. He's a specialist in evapotranspiration, soil-water balances, irrigation, excuse me, to make me something strange. So I apologize. He's a specialist in evapotranspiration, soil water balances, irrigation water management, and crop water productivity. He was involved in many international projects in Africa, Asia, and South America. Today, he still closely cooperates with FAO, Land and Water Division of the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, in the further development of AquaCrop, that is the model that the two speakers will present us today, the FAO-CROP model to simulate yield response to water. Professor Dirk Rijls is co-author of the FAO Irrigation and Drainage paper number 56, entitled Crop Evapotranspiration Guidelines for Computing Crop Water Requirements, and drainage and irrigation paper number 66, Crop Yield Response to Water. Professor Dirk Rijls, you are most welcome. And I want to present as well to Dr. Margarita García Vila from the Institute for Sustainable Agriculture in the Spanish National Research Council. Dr. Margarita Vila is currently a researcher at the Institute for Sustainable Agriculture of the Spanish National Research Council. Her scientific activity has focused on sustainable management and conservation of water in agricultural ecosystems, combining crop simulation models with other methodologies and tools under present and future climate. This work has been oriented to develop tools to assist in operational, tactical, and strategic decision-making on water management at different scales, from plot to basin level. Dr. Margarita García Vila is part of the core group of the AquaCrop model, contributing actively to its improvement and calibration. The research developed during her distinguished career allowed her to establish collaboration with several international research institutions, water use associations, private sector, and United Nations organizations as FAO and IAEA. So, Dr. Margarita García Vila, you are most welcome to our webinar. And after this presentation, dear speakers, so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jorge, for your kind words. If I may, I can start with the webinar. I will share my screen. I think, can you confirm that?
Yes, it's okay. Modeling plant growth with AquaCrop.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you very much to the organizer for inviting us to present on how the AquaCrop model simulates the plant growth. During this webinar, we will also play a special emphasis on demonstrating how the model performs under saline conditions, which is the primary focus of the international network of salt-affected soils. Dirk Rijls and I aim to provide a comprehensive overview of the model helping you understand its key applications and how it can be tailored to your specific conditions. We look forward to an engaging and productive session with you all. The webinar, firstly, I will provide an overview of AquaCrop model, highlighting its key features, the underlying mechanism that drive the model, its primary application, and also, of course, its limitations. Afterward, Ras will delve deeper into the simulation of the soil, water, and salt balance in AquaCrop. He will then conclude by discussing crop production and irrigation management under saline conditions using the model, supported by illustrative examples to enhance understanding of the model and its application under these conditions. Then let's start with an overview of the AquaCrop model. To understand what AquaCrop is, firstly, we need to be aware that, as you already know, soil and water management in crop system is a complex activity. It depends on many factors, such as the climate, the soil properties, the crop time, and even the variety, and of course, the agronomic practices, such as the fertilization. As you already know, these elements interact in different ways, making effective management a challenging task. So how can we deal with this complexity? One approach is to manage soil and water based on your experience or by conducting field experiments. However, field experimentation can be time and resource intensive. An alternative is to use crop simulation models, which allow us to manage this complexity more efficiently. Decision support systems that incorporate these models further help in making informed decisions using these models. While this approach reduces uncertainty, it does come with the trade-off of increased complexity, and this is a limitation. But what is a model? Maybe as you know, a model is a simplified representation of a system. In our case, the atmosphere plant soil system. A crop model consists of a set of mathematical equations that capture the interaction within the system. The development of these models draws from various disciplines, including agrometeorology, ecophysiology, and pedology. In the end, a crop model simulates the interactions between genotype, environment, and management practices in a cropping system. Using inputs such as climate data, soil variables, crop varieties, and management practices, the model simulates various processes, including phenological development, growth allocation to crop organs, and, for example, evapotranspiration. Through these processes, the model generates key outputs, such as crop yield, soil properties, or even all the components of our water balance. The number and types of crop models are quite large, and this is not surprising since there is no universal crop model suitable for all systems. Because we can have different objectives, processes, and environmental conditions that we are focused on. Over the last 3 or 4 decades, new knowledge has enlightened processes underlying the relationships between crop yield and water use. And also, technology has improved. Further, novel needs have emerged related to the planning and also the management of water in agriculture, including those arising from climate change. Recognizing this, 2 decades ago, the FAO revisited the approach to quantify crop yields in response to water use and water deficits. And through a consultation process with experts around the world, it was concluded that a new model to assess the crop yield response to water was needed. And AquaCrop was developed. AquaCrop at the end simulates the yield response of herbaceous crop to water with an approach balance between empirical and mechanistic methods. AquaCrop is particularly well suited to conditions in which water is a key limiting factor in crop production. The development of this modeling approach is the result of several years of collaboration with scientists, crop specialists, and practitioners around the world, consolidating at the end the vast amount of knowledge on crop-water relations available since the 70s. AquaCrop is primarily a water productivity model. But what is a water productivity model? In crop models, work is driven by various factors, including solar radiation as the source of energy and the intake of CO2, nutrients, and water. These elements serve as a key drivers on plant growth. Based on that, there are three main types of growth engines in crop models: carbon driver, solar driver, and water driven. In the carbon-driven growth engine, growth is based on the carbon assimilation by the leaf photosynthetic process. Maintenance and growth respiration of the various organs are accounting for to obtain at the end the biomass. This type of growth engine has the advantage of having an excellent physical and physiological basis for the process represented. The main disadvantage is that it requires excessive and complex parameterization of all different parameters. The models that use this approach include all the Wageningen crop models, such as SWAP and also WOFOS. Also, the models from the America Grow belong to this same group, to the carbon-driving growth engine. Although the solar radiation remains the primary driving force for all the growth engines, the term solar driving is reserved here for the specific case when the crop models derive the biomass directly from the intercepted solar radiation through a single synthetic coefficient. In this case, the radiation use efficiency, bypassing the intermediary steps, that is the CO2 assimilation and also, for example, the dark respiration. This approach was based on the pioneering work of Monteith in the 70s, who demonstrate that the cumulative seasonal light interception for several crops under optimal condition was closely related to the biomass production. The advantage of this type of growth engine are in the robustness of this coefficient, of this relationship, remaining constant under non-stressed conditions. And also, this coefficient is relatively easy to obtain, to estimate. However, one disadvantage of this type of growth engine is the inconsistent variability observed across different crops, location, and also years. The main models that use this approach are, for example, DSAT, STIC, EPIC, CropSeed, AppSim. Finally, models with a water-driving growth engine are based on the relationship discovered much early by the WIT in the 50s, which links biomass production to the amount of water transpired by the crop. This is because the pathway for the CO2 intake is the same as the water lost through the leaf. So the biomass is the product of transpiration of the crops times the biomass water productivity. That is the coefficient that substitutes the radiation use efficiency, which at the end represent the slope of the relationship between transpiration and biomass. As you can see, this parameter, the relationship between biomass and maize, can be normalized for different conditions across years and also location by dividing the crop transpiration by the atmospheric evaporative demand. However, it's affected by nutritional stress. Also, another advantage of this approach is that it accounts for the difference between C3 and C4 crops, which have distinct photosynthetic efficiencies. The main advantage at the end of this growth engine is the main disadvantage of this growth engine is the difficulties in determining the actual transpiration. Nevertheless, in the last years, we have different new methods to determine the evapotranspiration and also to separate evapotranspiration from the transpiration. As we said before, AquaCrop follows a water productivity approach, a water driving engine. And as a summary, we can say that AquaCrop uses a relatively small number of parameters compared to other models. It requires only commonly available inputs that you can determine relatively easily. And also, the model tries to achieve a balance between simplicity, accuracy, and robustness. Simplicity because it's based on general concepts. Accuracy because it's based on crop physiology processes and soil-water balance processes. And robust because it's widely applicable in different situations with acceptable accuracy. These characteristics have made AquaCrop very well received by the modelers community. Here, you can see the number of publications of the main crop models from their launch. The number of research publications devoted to AquaCrop was large. And when the annual publication rate is analyzed, the magnitude of AquaCrop research activities becomes more evident. It's the second model most used, only behind APSI. This is a significant achievement. Now that we have covered the growth engine and the main characteristics of AquaCrop, let's dive deeper and explore the model calculation scheme in summary. The first step is the simulation of the canopy development. The green canopy covers refers to the fraction of the ground covered by the green leaves of the crop. It's expressed as a percentage of the total ground area, ranging from 0, no canopy cover, to 1, full canopy cover. Green canopy cover increases as the crop grows and the canopy expands, as illustrated in this image of winter wheat in Belgium. The model simulates canopy cover development based on climatic conditions and soil moisture, among other factors. It incorporates soil moisture threshold that limits canopy expansion and also trigger early canopy senescence when moisture levels become insufficient. So it simulates the actual canopy cover affected by water stress and other factors, as we will see later with the Dirk Ras presentation. The second step is the estimation of the actual crop transpiration. It will depend on the evaporative demand using the ET naught and also on the canopy development, adjusting the crop coefficient for transpiration based on the actual canopy cover. Transpiration can also be reduced by water stress, as stomatal closure is triggered when the soil water content falls below the threshold for stomatal closure. Then the biomass is estimated using the water productivity parameter after normalizing the transpiration, being the key parameter of the model. And finally, the yield is calculated based on the harvest index, which is the fraction of biomass that is allocated to yield. Harvest index is also affected by water stress, increasing or decreasing its reference value. On the other hand, many of these processes are directly affected by the temperature, including crop and canopy development, transpiration, and harvest index. Furthermore, atmospheric CO2 impacts transpiration by inducing stomatal closure and also influence biomass production by altering the water productivity parameter. But other factors are also influence this process, such as the nutritional stress or the salinity stress, which Dirk will discuss in more detail later. Taking all this process into account, AquaCrop can simulate crop yield. However, let's take a closer look at the agronomic yield levels that the model can simulate. AquaCrop can simulate the potential yield. The yield produced under non-limiting conditions, determined only by the location, that is, by the radiation, temperature, and CO2 concentration, and also by the crop genetics. But AquaCrop can also simulate the attainable yield, which is determined additionally by the limiting factors, basically water and nutrients. But we must be aware that AquaCrop doesn't carry out a nutrient balance. There is a model that after local calibration of the soil fertility allows us to make assessment for suboptimal nutrition. And finally, we have the actual yield, which also depend on reducing factors such as weeds, pests, disease, and salinity. AquaCrop doesn't consider pests and disease. It is particularly relevant that AquaCrop accounts for the effects of soil salinity, a factor that most crop models fail to consider. In fact, based on a recent review that we have submitted, only 90% of the 21 wheat crop models analyzed take into account the downward slope movement and its effect on plant growth. Even fewer, just only 10% of this model consider the upward movement of salt from a water table. This highlights the AquaCrop unique capability to address salinity, making it particularly effective for implementation in arid and semi-arid environments where salinity poses a significant challenge. However, AquaCrop has important limitations shared with most crop models. For instance, AquaCrop is limited to herbaceous crops and cannot simulate tree crops. Another challenge lies in scaling from point level simulation to field level application, as the model assumes uniform field conditions. Furthermore, like most models, AquaCrop only considers the vertical water fluxes and doesn't account for lateral water movement. Considering all these aspects, some potential applications of AquaCrop that may be of interest to us include yield gap analysis, evaluates the impact of different crop and field management practices, develop optimal irrigation schedules with different water qualities, formulate irrigation strategies under water deficit conditions, assess crop response to environmental change. This type of assessment can be used to provide practical guidelines for farmers and also to support decision-making for policymakers. To highlight the multiple application of AquaCrop and its suitability for different environments, we show this map where we can see that AquaCrop has been implemented in 63 different countries across various agroecological zones, based on the scientific publications until 2019. This underscores that the model is a robust model with a high versatility in a wide range of applications. Here, we have provided an overview of AquaCrop, but for more detailed information, you can also visit the FAO-GSP website, where you will find several resources, including the reference manual, the training handbooks, and tutorials. Additionally, we recommend reading the FAO Irrigation Drainage paper number 66, which also contains valuable information on AquaCrop, and also some important guidelines to calibrate AquaCrop for different crops. This concludes our introduction to AquaCrop. If you have any question or comments, please feel free to ask in the chat. At the end of the session, we will try to solve the question. Now, Dirras will provide more details on the water and salt balance in AquaCrop. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Marga, for this nice introduction. Let's share my screen and start the PowerPoint. Number 2, this is this one. Here we are. Let me put this one a little bit smaller. Just a minute. Okay, so Marga has explained to you, given an overview of the AquaCrop model, and I would like to tell you something about, first of all, the simulation of the soil, water, and the salt balance, and then later more how AquaCrop simulate crop production under saline conditions. So let me start by explaining you the soil, the water balance in AquaCrop. Here you see the root zones, and in a lot of models, the root zone is depicted as a reservoir which contains a certain amount of water. Now, AquaCrop calculates for every day, which is the time step, the amount of water which enters the root zone, irrigation, rainfall, and if you have a shallow aquifer, also capillary rise. And it keeps also track of the outgoing water fluxes by drainage, by transpiration, and by evaporation. Now, by depicting it as a one container, that's of course a very simplified presentation, and it's not sufficient to describe accurately the retention and the movement and the uptake of water. To do that, AquaCrop will divide the soil profile into small compartments. So the root zone contains 12 compartments with a thickness of 10 centimeters by default, but you can change that. And each compartment belongs to a particular horizon with particular characteristics. And a compartment actually is a small bucket in which you can store water. Here you see that the 3 top compartments belongs to a loamy soil in this example, and also the lower compartments are to the loamy soil. They have characteristics. Here you find in blue, that's the amount of water in the soil, that's the amount of water in the top compartment, that's the amount of water in the bottom compartment, and you see that the water is in equilibrium with the gravitational forces and the metric forces. The soil is at field capacity. Now there is, these compartments, this loamy soil has saturation of 50 volume percentage, and I have a hydraulic conductivity of 250 millimeters per day, just as an example. Now, between those 2 layers of loam, there is at 30 centimeters a clay lens, which has a field capacity of 39 volume percentage and a saturated hydraulic conductivity of only 10 millimeters per day. So let me show you now how AquaCrop will simulate a water uptake, movement, and retention of the water in the root zone. Let's start with the retention of the water in the root zone. Well, when you are at field capacity or below field capacity, AquaCrop does not simulate anymore any water movement. For the uptake of water, well, you can design a particular extraction pattern, which by default is that 40% of the water is taken up in the top quarter by the plants and 10% in the lower quarter. Let's now look at the movement of the water through the macropores. Well, therefore, AquaCrop uses a drainage characteristic tau. And it describes the drainage of water from saturation to field capacity in function of the time. In this example, after a week, about 7 days, field capacity is reached. Now, the soil is characterized by a hydraulic conductivity, which is translated in a tau. And tau is actually the fraction of the total amount of water which can drain, which drains on the first day. So the fraction which drains on the first day, it is 50% in this type of soil. Logically, in a sandy soil, which has a much higher saturated hydraulic conductivity, also the tau will be much higher, and 90% of all the water drains on the first day, while a clay soil only 20%, and it takes more than a week, 2 weeks before you are at field capacity. Let's show you that by a simulation. So we are going to add water by rainfall to the soil, so 50 millimeters of water. Just for the sake of demonstrating the movement of water, I assume that there is no crop evapotranspiration. So the water enters in the soil, in the top compartment, and then after a day, the water content is already in the second layer. But of course, the second layer has a lower drainage, and as a consequence, he makes that the water cannot drain very quickly out of the top layer because the second layer blocks actually the water movement. So we are at day 7, 8, 9, and you see that the top layers and the lower layer are already back at field capacity, while the clay lens there is still draining because the drainage characteristics are very low. Here is an overview. So on day 1, there was 50 millimeters of rain coming in, and here you see in function of the time how much water was drained out of the root zone. So that is the soil water balance. I had to explain you that because now then I can explain you what is how AquaCrop simulates the salt balance. Well, the indicator for soil salinity stress in a lot of models is actually the electric conductivity of the saturation soil past extract. And as you know, to measure that, you take a soil sample, you bring it to the lab, you add deionized water until you reach a saturation pass, then you extract the water, put it in a container, put 2 electrodes in it, and you see how quickly the current can pass through it. And the more salts there are, the higher the conductivity, the higher the ECE. So the ECE in the models typically are expressed by the electric conductivity of the saturation soil past extract. I've explained you that AquaCrop simulates a soil water balance, but it also simulates a salt balance. And salts enter the root zone through irrigation or by capillary rise from a shallow saline groundwater table. And when there is excess rain or excess irrigation, water will drain out of the root zone, and also salts, of course, will be removed from the root zone. So every day, AquaCrop does not simulate only how much water there is in the profile, but also how much salts are added and removed. And that is expressed in tons per hectare. And to know what is then the salinity stress, it converts the salt content in ton per hectare in ECE in decisiemens per meter. So as I explained it, to simulate water movement, AquaCrop uses compartments. And here we see number of compartments, and the water content is at field capacity, let's assume. Now, to simulate now the movement and the absorption and the convection of the salts, therefore, each of the compartments is now divided in a number of cells, and in these cells, salts can be stored. Here you see there are a lot of cells here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. The small numbers the cells belongs to the micropores, and then when you are above field capacity, you have micropores, macropores, and there, of course, are also salts. So a cell actually is a representation of a volume of pores with a certain diameter. And in that cell, salts can be stored. Now, when you irrigate or when it rains, then the water, by convection, will pass through the matrix. But of course, the solute is just passing through it, and there is no contact actually with the soil matrix. Therefore, there is need for diffusion, and that is then the diffusion process, which makes that the salts, which are in the macropores, will enter in the soil matrix, where they can even store it in small micropores. Now, to prevent that all the salts are diffused into one compartment, there's also some vertical diffusion to the other cells. Now, the salt concentration gradient is the one which makes that there is a diffusion. So if cell 3 contains more salts than cell 2, salts will move to cell 2. Or if cell 1 contains more salt than cell 2, salts will move also to cell 2. Now, the swiftness with which the salts can move depends on the speed with which salt can move. That is 100% in the macropore. So here, the forces acting on the salts are quite small, so salts can move very quickly from one cell to the other. But to enter the soil matrix, this goes to the smaller pores, and therefore the speed with which salts can move under the gradient of the salt concentration becomes only 80% or 60 or 40 or even 10% in the small micropores. There, the conductivity of the diffusion of the salts is much more lower because there are strong absorption forces and a low hydraulic conductivity. Now, the number of cells depends on the type of soil. So a clay soil will contain much more cells than a sandy soil because they have much more micropores. Now let's look again at the simulation, but now it is a solute. So water is now added by irrigation, and the quality of the irrigation water has 2 decisiemens per meter. So AquaCrop plots here also the soil saline profile. In the dark gray, you see there are the salts. I'm already one day, let's go back. Here that is the initial state. You see that in dark gray, that is the initial state. Roughly, you have about salts, salt concentration is about 4 decisiemens per meter. So when you add that irrigation water, you add about 0.64 tons per hectare. AquaCrop calculates that, and he also simulates how is the salt profile, the salt salinity profile, excuse me. And you see the water here remains in the topsoil on the first day, and of course then the salt concentration will be higher in this layer. But if you go to day 2 and 3 and 4, you see the water is now draining to the layer 2, and since the irrigation water had a quality of 2 decisiemens per meter, while there was 4 decisiemens per meter of salts in the root zone, you will see that the root zone will be leached and salts are removing out of the top layer. And as the water passes through the clay lens and then finally finds its way in the subsoil, there also some drainage will take place. And after, let's say, day 8, you see there's still this layer is draining, and you see that the topsoil was leached somewhat, while this clay lands, which has many, many cells, there the salinity is still rather high. Now, to conclude this presentation, let's now evaluate the salt balance. And therefore, I rely on another publication of FAO, which is the Water Quality of Agriculture. In that publication, they gave a theoretical calculation of the ECE, which will end up in the root zone after irrigating the crop with water with different qualities. There are a lot of assumptions made. It is only valid for sandy loamy soils to clay loamy soils. There is no rainfall, and the water extraction is 40% in the top quarter and 10% in the lower quarter. The amount of water, the irrigation, it compensates the amount of water lost by crop evapotranspiration, but some extra water is given, that is the leaching requirement. Because if you give extra water, you will have depercolation, and that depercolation, as we have seen in the simulation a minute ago, it can leach salts out of the root zone. In the theoretical calculation model, different qualities of the irrigation water are considered, different leaching fractions are considered, and theoretically you can calculate then what will be the ECE, what will be the salt concentration in the root zone. In that calculations, you use different leaching fractions, 10, 20, 30%, and also different qualities of the irrigation. Here you find the results of the theoretical calculations. In the axis here, you have the quality of the irrigation water, 1 decisiemens, 2, 3, 4 decisiemens per meter. And in the ordinate, you have the ECE in the root zone, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 decisiemens per meter. And here on these lines, you have the various leaching fractions. So according to the calculations, if you irrigate with a quality of 2 decisiemens per meter, and there is a leaching of 40%, so it means you add 40% extra water, then the ECE in the root zone will be a little smaller than the quality of the irrigation water, a little bit smaller than 2. However, if you only add 20% extra water, so the leaching is less, and as a consequence, also the ECE is larger. And when you leach only 10%, then the ECE in the root zone will almost be the double of the quality of the irrigation. That is all theoretically calculated. And if we try now to simulate with AquaCrop the same things, then you end up with this simulation. This is the red dots are for the loamy soil, and the other ones for the sandy loamy soils. And you see, AquaCrop is able to simulate what is theoretically possible. Now, we also simulated with other salts for which the calculations are not valid. For example, for a sandy soil, and as we know, a sandy soil has not many salt cells. Salts are easily moved in and out, so there the relationship is somewhat different, as well as for a silty clay loam soil, which has much more cells. So since we are able to simulate the theoretical calculations and also to simulate salt movement in sandy soil and silty clay soils, which are not described by the calculations, we believe that the salt balance is well simulated by AquaCrop. So this concludes now my first presentation. So we now know the soil water balance and salt balance. And once again, I refer for references to the FAO AquaCrop website, where you can also look at the resources and at the reference manual, and you have different reference manuals, about 1,000 1,000 pages in total, actually, giving you user guidelines, calculation procedures, calibration guidelines, and there are even more chapters and annexes. So let me now share you the other PowerPoint. Here we are. Sorry, here's my pointer options. Okay, here we are again. So Marga has explained to you how AquaCrop more or less works. I've explained to you the soil-water balance and the salt balance, and we see that the salt balance, that AquaCrop is able to simulate correctly a soil-water balance. But now we still need to know how is the crop production changing under saline conditions and how is that simulated in AquaCrop. Let me first show you some theory. Theory which comes from a lot of experiments. Here you see in the axis here, you see the ECE, the electric conductivity of the soil saturation path. And if the ECE is below a lower threshold, then an upper threshold, then the biomass production, which is here, is 100%. You have no reduction in the biomass production. On the other hand, and there is no salinity stress. Now, typically, values for an upper threshold for rice, which is a sensitive crop, is 3 decisiemens per meter, and it's you got from experiments, and results are described in that FAO publication. Now, that FAO publication gives you also the lower threshold, which corresponds for rice with 11 decisiemens per meter. So if the ECE in the root zone is 11 or more, you have no more production, production becomes 0, and you have 100% stress. This is a linear relationship. From experiments, it is very clear that it is linear, but the relationship is only valid in a well-watered crop. So it is an irrigated crop, irrigated very frequently. That were the experiments were run under those conditions, and then they found that linear relationship. So if the ECE in the root zone of rice is 6 decisiemens per meter, then the model tells us that the biomass production is only 60% and the salinity stress is 40%. If it is 9.5 decisiemens per meter, then the biomass production will be only 20% and salinity stress will rise up to 80%. Now, this was for rice, beans, the same model there, but the thresholds are different. It is an extremely sensitive crop. Wheat is moderate tolerant, cotton very tolerant. The upper threshold is only 8 decisiemens per meter. So that is the model. So that is something which we know. That's a theory, if you like, but we have to translate it, of course, in the model. So if you know what is the ECE in the root zone, and you know the upper and the lower threshold of your soil, then it is possible to find that the biomass production in this example will be reduced by 80% and the salinity stress is 20%. That's the theory. How is that now simulated in AquaCrop? Well, the effect of salinity are described in AquaCrop with 4 stress factors. The first one is on the canopy cover. Marga has shown you that the canopy cover increases when the crop develops. At the mid-season, we reach maximum canopy cover, and then in the late season, the green canopy cover declines. Now, when there is salinity stress, first of all, you will have less dense canopy. Instead of 100% canopy cover, I might have only 60% canopy cover. Secondly, the canopy develops slower. And thirdly, there is also a canopy decline during the mid-season. Before senescence kicks in, there is already some leaves start dropping off. So these are 3 stress factors which are simulated by AquaCrop. There is a 4th stress factor, which is triggering of stomatal closure. That means even if the soil is well watered, you are around field capacity, even then the stomata are not 100% open, but only 80% effective, let's say. So this results in a crop transpiration, which is somewhat affected. So crop transpiration, as Marga has shown you, is the product of three factors. ET node, that is the, ET node, that is the, describes the weather condition, the evaporative demand. You have a Kc factor, which is a crop coefficient, which is proportional to Cc. Since we have a smaller Cc in brown now, due to the salinity stress, Cc will be smaller. As a consequence, the canopy cover will be the crop coefficient will be smaller, and as a consequence, we have transpiration. But on top of that, we have a stress factor describing the triggering of the stomatal closure. It is no longer 1, but due to some of that only 80% of the stomata are open, it is, let's say, only 0.8. So that results in less transpiration. As Marga has shown, once you know the transpiration, then you know the biomass. The biomass is the biomass water productivity, which is constant for a soil, times transpiration, normalized for the climate. If you have less biomass, you will have also less yield, because the yield is linked with the biomass by means of the harvest index. So AquaCrops now trigger stomatal closure and makes also that the canopy cover is smaller when there is salinity stress. Now, it is actually the other way around. Let me show you that. Let me try to explain that. So we have a crop which has a minimum, a lower threshold, and a maximum threshold. At the lower threshold, you have full biomass production, and at the maximum threshold, then if the ECE is that high, you have no biomass production. We have seen that AquaCrop can simulate quite well the ECE, the electric conductivity in the root zone as a result of irrigation by saline water or by capillary rise from a shallow saline water table. So every day AquaCrop knows what is ECE. That is well simulated. Now, if you know what is ECE, AquaCrop knows then also by how much the biomass should be reduced. So let's say in this example, the biomass production with that ECE can no longer be 100%, but has to be, let's say, 80%. Oh, AquaCrop knows now that the biomass production is only 80%. Now, that biomass water productivity is a constant, so the only way to simulate biomass production is to reduce also the transpiration by 20%. So therefore, once again, we look now at the equation. There it is. There is the ET node, which is the climatic conditions. So AquaCrop can now reduce the transpiration by simulating a less dense canopy cover and by closing somewhat the stomata. By how much? So these are the three stress factors, 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, he reduces the maximum canopy cover. 2, he slows the canopy development. And 3, there is some canopy decline. And 4, he closes somewhat the stomata. By how much? Well, that depends on the salinity stress, which is in this case 80%. And that determines how strong these stress factors are. So actually, AquaCrop first simulate what should be the biomass production, and then it simulates that is the result of a reduced transpiration, and that is the result of less canopy cover and stomatal close. Once again, it is a simple model, but it seems to work well under well-watered conditions. So if you look in literature, you find some publications, and I've listed here 3. This is winter wheat, simulated by AquaCrop in the North China plain. Also here we are in China for cotton, and then I found one for rice in Bangladesh. And it seems that these publications prove that AquaCrop was able to simulate the crop production in those saline environments. maybe to conclude, I can give you one more, or show you one more application, and that is the leaching by winter rains. We are in Ramallah. I'm sorry, it is Ramallah that is in the West Bank, which for the moment have some troubles there. But it was an example worked out for a Palestinian delegation in Jordan before the war started there, actually. Don't worry about it. It is general here. So they are irrigating, and there is not much water in that region. And the irrigation is just to compensate crop evapotranspiration. So there is no leaching. As a consequence, you will build up salts in the root zone. Now, and you end up with a high salt content in the root zone. Now the question was, is the winter rains, because it rains in the winter, is that sufficient to remove the salts out of the root zone? So that was the question which was asked. Is the leaching of the salts by the winter rains sufficient to maintain high crop yields? So we did some simulations. Here you find some characteristics of the climate. In the green line is the ET naught, and you see that's very high in summer, more than 180 millimeters in July, which is more than 6 millimeters per day. And in blue, you are the rainfall. You see the winter rains here. This is January, February, and also the winter rains picks up again in November and in December. So here you have the irrigation season of my irrigated crop, where there is no leaching taking place. And so the irrigation there is water quality, which is rather poor, 1.5 decisiemens per meter. And we looked at typically moderate sensitive crops to salinity stress like squash, peppers, lettuce, potatoes, and so forth. Here you find the climatic data of the last 31 years. So here is the rainfall in 1990, which was about 250 millimeters. You see the rainfall varies a lot from one year to the other. At the end, actually, in 2020, there was a lot of rain, more than 700 millimeters of rainfall in a year. So we simulated that by AquaCrop. Let me show you how it goes. We started our simulation on the 1st of January by a bare soil. So here, rainfall leads the salts out of the roots. And then in May, we assume the crop was planted and it was then harvested in green at the end of August. So during this period of the irrigation season, salts build up in the root zone. Then we start a second year, and we start at the 1st of September, and we assume we keep the soil water content and the salt content. At the end of the previous simulation is the input for the next simulation. So we have the salts here built up in the first year. Then we once again simulate on a bare soil, because here in 91, and then on the 1st of May 91, we have once again the crop planted. Here we have building up of the salt, and then we go to simulation 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. There are 31 years in a row which were simulated. Here you find the output of a simulation of run 6. It was in the 6th year. So here you find 1st September, that's 1st of January, and here is May, the 1st of May, where we plant the crop. So we do, first of all, the irrigation, the simulation starts in the off-season by leaching salts out of the root zone, and then comes the irrigation season in which salts are added. The top graph shows the crop transpiration, the second graph, the green canopy cover, the third graph, the root zone depletion. And let's have a closer look at the root zone depletion. Here, I've plotted the rainfall during the off-season. This is a daily rainfall. You see a lot of rains enters there. And that brings the water content in the root zone, which is that blue line, above field capacity. Here you are above field capacity. Once you are above field capacity, water can drain out of the soil profiles and take salts with them. So if you look then at a simulation of the amount of salts which are drained out of the soil profile, you see there indeed a lot of salts are drained. And AquaCrop plots also the total amount of salt that at the beginning of the year was rather high, about 18 tons per hectare, but then due to the leaching of the salts out of the root zone, we ended with about, let's say, 5 tons per hectare at the start of the next season. So in the off-season, salts are moved out of the root zone, but then, of course, as soon as irrigation starts, salts start building up again in the root zones. What are the conclusions? Here you see the rainfall for each of the years, so that is 1990. So the bar is the total rainfall of a year. Here there was more rainfall, and as we have shown already at the end, there was also more rainfall. Let's now look at the amount of salt stored in the soil profile, now as a total for a year. So in the beginning, it was very low because that was the first year, but you see gradually more and more salts are stored in the root zone, and they reach a high salt content. AquaCrop simulates that in tons per hectare, but of course it diverted also into ECE to know what is the salinity stress. Now our crop, we had a moderate tolerant crop. Lower threshold is 2, upper threshold is 12, and you will see that the crop will suffer quite a lot here when the salinity is at around 8, 9. Here you find the yields, relative yield. So this is 100% yield. Even already the first year, there were some salinity stresses. The yield was only 90%. The yield declined even below 75%, which is still acceptable. Then, thanks to somewhat more rain, the yield remains in acceptable, 75%. But then you see here the rainfall declines, also the relative yield declines. You can pick it up again thanks to that high rainfall, but then you end up in a failure here. You have actually no more yield here. And so the simulations were stopped. Well, stopped. The simulations continue without the crop. So thanks to the rain, some salts were removed out of it. And here in 2012, the simulations pick it up again. And then we remained into that acceptable yield. But at that moment, the rainfall were larger. So we can conclude that due to that rainfall of 200 millimeters or a little bit more, that is not sustainable. You need to add extra leaching to keep the crop production rather good. There is also, and there is here, you see, as soon as the rainfall is more than 400 millimeters, you are able to have a good production. Now, to just as a kind of an exercise, but I will not go in details, we did then as an exercise also not only in Ramallah, but we did exactly the same in Tunisia. And although the climate of Tunisia looks very the same as of Ramallah, you see the ET node is quite the same, but the rainfall is, the monthly rainfall is not much larger, but there is much more rainfall. So the winter rains are longer in Tunis. So you have a longer period of winter rains. I'm not going to go all the details, but you can look later if you like. But it is the same simulations. And here you find the end of the simulations for Tunis. There you see the rainfall for each of the years, which are around 400 millimeters. And here you once again, you see the simulated yield close to 100%. Here it drops a little bit, but it remains in the 75% yields, which means that yield this irrigation strategy is sustainable. So just an example to show you that with AquaCrop, you can see if how much leaching is required to keep the production at an acceptable level. Now, to conclude, we can say that, or we believe that with a proper description of the environment, AquaCrop is able to simulate the effect of soil salinity on the crop yield. But of course, you need to describe very good your environment, the climate. What is the rainfall, air temperature? What is ethanol, and how it is distributed? You see, in the monthly rainfall in Tunis was less than in Ramla, but it was more spread. The distributions was different, and this resulted also in more sustainable crop production in that particular climate. You have to specify what is the tolerance to salinity of crops. So we looked at moderate tolerance, but if we were maybe looking at cotton, maybe that was possible to have that one in Ramallah, at the West Bank, because it is a much more tolerant crop. Also depends on the planting date, and the length of the growing cereal needs to be well specified. Field management, we didn't enter in details, but there is a way also to look at soil fertility in AquaCrop. There's also a way to look at runoff by rainfall. You can make it more runoff or lower depending on field management practices. And then, of course, what is the method of irrigation? Is that drip irrigation, or is that furrow irrigation, which is or basin irrigation, which allow better leaching of the root zone? What is the irrigation schedule? What is the water quality? This has to be specified as well. And we have seen also the effect of soil types. Sandy soils are less prone to salinity, as we know, than to salinity stress than the more heavy soil types. And finally, there is the groundwater. So how deep is the groundwater table, and what is the water quality? Because that determines, of course, the salinity stress. So if all that is well described, we believe, and publication shows that AquaCrop is able to simulate the effect of soil salinity on crop yield. One final thing, one final remark, all the experiments which are given in literature always refers to a well-watered crop. It's always a crop which is irrigated with different qualities of irrigation water, but continuously irrigated, and then they see the effect of salinity, and that is described in literature. So as long as you remains in a well-watered soil, AquaCrop is able, or models are able to, or AquaCrop, so I should say AquaCrop is able to simulate the effect of soil salinity on the crop yield. Let me show you the need, the restriction. What is the restriction of a well-watered soil? Here I give you an example. Let's assume that I have a soil, a root zone, which is 1 meter thick, and these are the characteristics of my soil. At saturation, you have 50 volume percent, at field capacity 30, and at wilting point, you have 10 volume percentage. Let's assume that due to irrigation or whatever, you have a salt concentration of 18 tons salts per hectare. Now, you can calculate with the indicator what is the soil salinity stress. The indicator is the electric conductivity of the soil saturation past extract. And if you calculate that, you end up that the ECE, when you have 9.2 tons salts in this type of soil, in the root zone of 1 meter, it is 6 decisiemens per meter. Now, if the water content after heavy rain or whatever is close to saturation, what is ECE? Is always 6 decisiemens per meter. If due to irrigation you're able to keep the soil water content in the root zone, what is ECE? It is 6 decisiemens per meter. If by absence of irrigation, the water content is close to wilting point, what is ECE? It is 6 decisiemens per meter. Because ECE, it is measured, you take a soil sample, which has well, not 90.10 salts per hectare. This if you take the total, but you take a soil sample which has a certain concentration of salt, and then you add deionized water. So the salt concentration will be always 6 decisiemens per meter, because you always measure in the same saturation salt pest extract. However, crops does not grow in a saturated soil, of course. Let's now have a look at the electric conductivity of the soil water. Now, if the soil is at saturation, yes, then all the salts are dissolved in the 50 volume percentage, and EC of the soil water will be 6 decisiemens. But if you are at field capacity, only 60% of your soil pores are filled with water, and ECE of the soil water is already 10 decisiemens per meter, and that is the stresses will the crop which will receive. And if you are at wilting point, ECE is not 6. Well, ECE remains 6, but the ECE of the soil water is already 30 decisiemens per meter. So if you have not a soil which is well watered, which is around field capacity, then maybe ECSW, so the electric conductivity of the soil water, might be a more relevant indicator when the crop is not well watered. And that's a possibility in AquaCrop to check that. I will not explain that here, but there is a calibration to do that, although it is mentioned there, the simulation of the effects of soil salinity on canopy development and crop production are largely untested and theoretically. So there is a way to test it, to describe it, to use the soil water, the electric conductivity of the soil water, which we believe is a better indicator, but of course there are not much experiments by which we can test the model. But I would like to conclude positively, namely that AquaCrop is able to simulate the effect of soil salinity on crop if you have a well-watered crop and if you are able to describe very good your environment, actually. Once again, as references, I refer to the AquaCrop website, where in the reference manuals you can find a lot of information, which I briefly explained here in this PowerPoint. So that concludes my 2 presentations, and now we are open to discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor Dirk Reis and Dr. Margarita, for your nice, clear, and well-structured presentation that I think that will make clear all participants what can AquaCrop do. Just to mention before giving the floor to Maria, that has Dr. Maria Kuniskova, that has collected some questions during your presentation. Your model and your presentation has received a worldwide attention and interest, because I saw participants from Australia, China, Philippines, India, several countries of Africa, and as well Canada, Mexico, Argentina. So it is difficult to collect participants from so different time zones. And so congratulations, because it is not only because of the webinar, of course, it is because of the reputation of your model. So Maria, please, could you convey the questions that have been addressed?
Yes, thank you, Jorge. So the questions are quite diverse in terms of from very general to very, very technical and specific. So first question is related to the updates of the AquaCrop. Were there updates, how the model was updated during the course of this life, let's say, since it was created?
So maybe if I can answer. So the model was launched in 2009. So that's about 15 years ago, let's say. And then we started actually with version number 3 because we built it 3 years on the model before it was released. Because we were happy with it, so we started with version 3, and then came version 3.1, 3.2, then version 4, and so on and so forth. And now we are at version 7.2. So let's say every year, more or less, there is an update. It means we bring in some new things. For example, salinity was not there right from the beginning. Weeds are also added. So regularly new things are added, but always keeping in the philosophy, it should be simple model. And then, of course, sometimes we fine-tune some of the calculation procedures because we found a better way to describe it. So let's say once a year, you will find a new one. So today we are at 7.2.
Great, thank you. So the next question, why doesn't AquaCrop have a nutrient balance component? What are the difficulties that led to this?
Marga, I leave this question to you if you like.
Okay, maybe, o sea, I think Dirk can answer better than me this question because he was in the discussion between the AquaCrop, the core group developers of AquaCrop when they discuss these things. Bueno, as you know, the nutrient, o sea, the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle, and all the nutrients are something so complex. Some other models, like for example, DSAT, APSIM, they perform this nutrient cycle, mainly focus on nitrogen. But the fertility at the end is a complex task. As we said in several times during our presentation, the philosophy of AquaCrop model is to try to keep simple as possible and reduce as much as possible the number of parameters to be used by practitioners at the end, not by modelers. Because we are looking for practitioners. And then in the core group, they decide that use this simple approach for this local calibration of the soil fertility for your specific condition. That at the end is a relationship. So the soil fertility is directly related with the reduction of the biomass production and also the impact on the canopy development and so on. It was a decision to keep the model simple as possible at the end. Yeah. I don't know, maybe you can complement my answer.
No, you explained it perfectly. So there is indeed a module for soil fertility in AquaCrop, but it's very simple. It asks just to the user, what is your maximum biomass production or crop yield you can get in your area, given under rainfall, given the climate, but what is the maximum production? Let's say they said, well, in a good rainy year and so on, we might have 6 tons per hectare. And then AquaCrop calculates without any restriction how much biomass or yield might be, and the potential yield might be without any stresses. Well, water stresses, of course, well, but without any other stresses, 10 tons. So AquaCrop knows there is a fertility stress, which is 40%. And then AquaCrop simulate that fertility stress in a simple way. So there is a way of bringing it in. It is very simplified. And as Marga said, let's forget about all the movements of nitrogen and all these very difficult things, because that is too complex. And we had to add too many questions to the user. So the input of the model is so simple, always very easy questions, and a lot of default values can be used with a good results.
Okay, thank you. Then the question is more specific. What are the parameters that can be calibrated to accurately simulate soil water content in AquaCrop?
For water, the water movement. Is it for the soil water balance? Was it, or for the salt balance?
Soil water content.
Oh, the soil water content. Yes, yes. So therefore, we use the physical soil physical parameters. So we need to know what is the amount of water at saturation, at field capacity, and at permanent wilting point, and also the hydraulic conductivity. Now that is input in the model. Now, but in the model or in the manuals, it is also shown one of the softwares which was developed by the USDA, which says if you know the soil texture, how many clay or salt or sand you have in your soil, that you can calculate what is the corresponding field capacity, wilting point, and hydraulic conductivity actually. And that is sufficient. It was tested actually with carefully soil samples which were taken from the field, and then also by looking at the granulometry and then at the soil texture, and then looking in that in that hydraulic calculator, they call it, and then compare the simulations, and they are very, very similar. So if you know what type of soil it is, that is already sufficient, and each model shows that that is accurate enough to have good simulations.
Okay, next question is about the fertilization data. How can I enter into the model the real field fertilization data to consider fertilizer applications?
Oh, fertilizer application? No. There, the model cannot give you that part. But as I've explained it already, and Marga explained it, is a very simple nutrients, is even not a nutrient balance, but a simple way of expressing what is the fertility stress in a well-watered environment. And then, of course, we run it in the natural environment without much rainfall or without irrigation. And that seems to work as well rather good. But it's very simple. But giving estimates of how much fertilizer is needed, no, that's not AquaCrop. AquaCrop cannot do that.
Okay, the next question about the perennial crops, which has like biennial bearing, that the AquaCrop has been previously parameterized to include some perennial crops. Is there a way to represent complex growth patterns in the model for perennial crops like alternate biennial bearing?
Well, yes, we are now. Indeed, was 2 years ago, I think, with version 7, we introduced alfalfa, actually, which is a perennial crop. And so AquaCrop was actually able to simulate that perennial crop. Maybe, Marga, you can add something?
Yeah, for as Dirk said, for perennial crops is possible, but always thinking, for example, in herbaceous perennial crops, because there are additional issues regarding tree crops that AquaCrop in the current version cannot address. For example, the effect of the water stress in 1 year, how it's affecting the yield production in the following years or following season. There are several complex interactions between several seasons that at this stage, AquaCrop cannot account for this kind of complex interaction between seasons, especially in tree crops. But as Dirk said, for perennial herbaceous crops, is possible.
Thank you. Then some let's say clarifying questions. So why did the salt values initially increase yet if the incoming water quality was 2 decisiemens per meter and the soil salinity was 4 decisiemens per meter? So
well, yeah, I think that's not a problem, because you added actually water you added actually salts in that top layer. So in the top layer, there were salts corresponding with 4 decisiemens per meter. But if you start your irrigation, that water remains in the topsoil. There is no leaching. So you add water there, no problem, but you add also salt. So you added more salt, and as a consequence, the salinity increases in those layers. But of course, later, when that water was able to move through the soil profile, then it starts draining actually, and taking the salts out of the soil matrix, and then you see that the salinity declined in the topsoil.
Okay, and when you model soil salinity, do you assume zero evaporation?
No, well, excuse me, that was maybe due to my example, but I wanted to show only the movement of the water and the movement of the salts out of the root zone. Of course, at the same time, in that AquaCrop will simulate that, of course, there is also evaporation and transpiration. But I didn't want to otherwise it is very difficult to analyze the result. But just for the purity of the example that I kick it out evapotranspiration actually. I said, okay, we are in winter or whatever, there is no evapotranspiration. But of course, in reality, there is evapotranspiration, and AquaCrop is able to simulate all these processes together.
Yeah, I suppose that the next question is maybe similar to the one about soil salinity and irrigation water, that if you apply a leaching fraction of 80%, your soil electrical conductivity of EC is 1, half the conductivity of the irrigation water. So how is it possible? So maybe in your example.
In my example, yes, you can end up with an ECE in the soil, which is lower than the salts in by irrigation. That is possible if leaching is indeed very, very high, because you irrigate. So you bring salts in the root zone, the water is taken up by the crop and the salts remains there. But if you do the leaching, even with leaching with 1 decisiemens per meter, salts will be flushed out of the root zone because there is no interaction, if you like. Well, the convection passes in the macropores, and the macropores are drained actually, which makes that salinity in the total root zone can become less. No, that is well known. So it's possible to have an ECE in the root zone, which is lower than the quality of the irrigation water if leaching is very high.
Okay, so then so maybe the question is not clear to me. Maybe it will be more clear to you that why is the canopy senescence rate lower in the case of salinity stress? No, I checked this word senescence. It's like aging.
Yeah, well, maybe what I try to explain that AquaCrop simulates so the canopy development. So if there is no stresses, then the canopy will increase until mid-season, and then we have a high canopy cover, and then only in late season, then the canopy starts to decline because that's the end of the crop. But as soon as there is salinity, or that's the same for fertility stress also, then you have already some senescence in the mid-season stage. So even if the crop is not at the end of its life, it starts already losing some leaves because there's a shortage of nutrient stress, or there is too much salt, which makes that the crop cannot well develop. But the decline of the canopy, yeah, that is not affected, I would say. There's another thing there. It is the senescence during the mid-season, which is simulated when there is fertility stress and salinity stress, yes.
Thank you. Next question about TR. Do you adjust the TR for the crop after the input of the quality of the irrigation water? How can you adjust the TR for crop after adjusting the quality of the irrigated water? Is this automatically done in the model?
Marga?
Yes, o sea, the answer is yes, is automatically estimated by the model. The model estimates the actual transpiration because the salinity is affecting the stomatal close, as was explained by the rice, And this there is in the model a stress factor for the stomatal claws due to salinity, and then reduce the transpiration. Then is automatically done by the model.
Yes, so then the questions about several questions about the crops that are missing in the model. So that I noticed that some countries such as Benin, where I'm writing from, are not included into the database. And also not all crops are listed there. How can we address these limitations in both cases? And there was also the question about the peanut. So how can we do, maybe these crops are missing. So what is how can it be overcome?
Marga?
Okay, as the participant said, I think there are right now around 17, 70 crops in the database of AquaCrop. The crops that are already included in database, we are more or less sure that are well calibrated and validated. For sure, in the literature, you can find several publications with calibration and validation of AquaCrop for several crops, for major and also minor crops. In this case, you can use this publication to enter the parameters into the AquaCrop, in the AquaCrop. In fact, there are a default crop file in the AquaCrop database that you can adjust using these parameters published in the literature. But of course, we are not completely sure about the quality of this calibration, because normally the crops that are already included in the database, there was tested in several environments with different deficit irrigation treatments. Maybe this publication, they don't have perform this analysis under different environments and treatments. But in any case, let me say that we are maybe in delay in updating this crop database inside of the AquaCrop core group. We need to improve this thing in trying to update and include new crops in this database. This is a permanent effort that takes a lot of time to verify all these parameters, but for sure we need to work on that direction. I don't know, Dirk, if you want to add something.
Then the question about if AquaCrop is a one-dimensional model, then how irrigation method is described? Furrow irrigation, drip irrigation?
Well, it is one-dimensional indeed. So, but if you apply 2 millimeters of water to the root zone by drip, or let's say 4 millimeters of water by drip, well, then the 4 millimeters of water will infiltrate in that soil. If the plants are close enough, right? But of course, if the distance between the plant rows is very large, then you have to do some calculations, and you cannot say that the 2 millimeters of water enters in the total soil. Then you have to look only to the part of the soil which is irrigated, actually. So you have to take out the remaining part. So there is some description there. I think it's not yet in the manual, but we have a note on that. I should put it in AquaCrop. So it's indeed, if indeed drip irrigation and you have the rows far apart, so you only irrigate 20% of the field actually, then of course you should also simulate it a little bit differently. That's a good question, and that reminds me that we should put that actually in the model. Maybe Marga, you have to.
Yeah. I would like to emphasize that AquaCrop works with net irrigation. That is important. Then we are not consider the application efficiency that, as you know, depend on the irrigation method. AquaCrop is considering the different irrigation methods only at the end to estimate, for a better estimation of the soil evaporation. That depend, one of the factor is the soil surface weighted. And depends of the irrigation method, this surface will be higher or smaller. Then it's only considered for that, because as we said, we are considering only the net application, okay? Or yeah, that's all.
Okay, and so the last question at the moment is that, so the description of the environment is that this is the rich, clay-rich soils, shell soil, and in the new reclaimed lands. So can AquaCrop model be used there in such conditions, then somehow used for decision making, for reclamation, to understand how to move on for some decision making?
I'm not sure that I get fully the question. So is reclamation of souls of the soul actually? I'm not fully confident with that question. Maybe Marga, you have an answer to that one?
No, I would say more generally, can AquaCrop model be used to make decisions about the treatment, the reclamation of soil? So when you model, then you see, and then you take decisions based on what was modeled.
Yes,
generally.
yes. I think it is always in the simple environment of AquaCrop. For example, if you have a very saline soil, AquaCrop, as I've shown you, can show you how much water need to be leached to reach, once again, an acceptable salt accumulation in the root zone, that it is possible to grow crops on it. So that is possible with AquaCrop. Or if you have a soil which is very shallow and a water table which is very high, there also the production will be low due to too much water. So AquaCrop can not only simulate the effect of water stress, but also the effect of too much water in the soil. So then you can say, if you drain that soil, so that you can then simulate in AquaCrop by putting the aquifer or the water balance somewhat lower, then you can see what is the effect on crop yield. Yeah, these are simple applications, if I would say, but which shows you what are possible interventions. Yes. Or another intervention is, for example, weeds. Wheat in some countries is a huge problem. So the weeds in the field. So AquaCrop is able to simulate the effects on the weeds, because it affects the water balance. The weeds takes up water, but they don't produce crops, of course. And so by taking out the weeds, by better weed control, what is the effect on crop yield? That is also things which you can simulate by AquaCrop. Or changing the layout, so improving that there is less runoff by making terraces or something like that is also a way to put that up in AquaCrop and see what is the effect, because there is less runoff, so more water will enter in the root. So what's the effect on the yield? So these are a few things which pops up my mind. Maybe Marga, you have more. Okay, these are just a few examples. Yes.
So I'm over with the questions.
Thank you. So if you allow me to comment, well, the interest for modeling, it is very, very high. And all, well, modelers want to have two contradictory conditions. One, that the model is simple, and then that takes over any phenomena happening there. And if processes in natural soils are difficult to model, then with managed soils, it is very difficult. And if you allow me the joke, that is an old joke, is that it tells that all models are tricky until they demonstrate the opposite. But you have a good record on this with the successful examples. So it means that perfection is enemy of very good performance. And I think that you have done a very, very good approach and to highlight as well for attendants that with models you can model different scenarios and then check what if this happens and what happens if these other circumstances appear. So I think that your approach is very valuable, and we encourage you to follow up with this, and thank you for that. And my second comment is a concern that I have, and because for some people, watching this curves of leaching fractions from Ayers and Westcott and now with the now with this saline agriculture, and emerging idea. But I think that well, I would like to hear your opinion, because there are excess as well in the some people. We see some examples that they take such water that you cannot get quite anything there. And then you have a leaching fraction, even applying a huge percentage of irrigation water, that finally your drainage water is so saline that this will impact somewhere around. And then could you tell us some about how the model can predict about the salinity of the leaching fraction, and well, how to do that with that, because some impacts can happen, better than me.
Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. So the leaching fraction just shows you how well the root zone is leached. That's indeed true. But the model does not show what is the effect of leaching. And as you mention it, you move a lot of salts and water, and especially water, to the subsoil. And as a consequence, the water table will rise. And in the end, you will have huge problems with a shallow saline water table, and everything is destroyed, actually. So leaching without a drainage system to keep the drainage under control, to keep the capillary rise under control, the rise of the water table, yeah, that is very, very essential. Now, AquaCrop simulates the effect of capillary rise, but the model does not show how the capillary rise, how the water table rises as a consequence of leaching. That is not in the model. So it is the user which has to tell what is the depth and the quality of the water table. And of course, if you are in irrigation season where there's a lot of leaching, well, then you can say, oh, my water table is rising, but you have to specify it yourself, or you monitor on the field and you give the test input. It's a very, very essential question. So it seems that by leaching, we get rid of all the salts, but you might end up with much more problems, actually, if drainage is not properly taken care. Thank you, Jorge, for that one. Yeah.
No. Well, I think that it was excellent webinar, and I'm sure that you will get some additional requests for information from people that now they are assimilating what you have presented, and as Maria told in the chat window, the content of this webinar and other webinars can be consulted in the webpage of the INSAS network, and it will take a delay of a few days here, this webinar, but it will happen quickly. And it is a good record for everybody that can review about your presentations and the concepts and so on. And I think that it is magnific work, taking into account that it is close to the end users, that they can do simulations without so much concern about some other scientific complex processes. And I think that this will be used as you mentioned increasingly, and you are working on that. And to highlight as well the effort of such crop, in this case, people that take the measurement about the different crops, how they evaporate, how the stomatal closure, and so it is not only a matter of computing that it is very important, but as well to deal with the living being that is the crop. So congratulations, you have made a very good and very useful synthesis. And thank you for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us in the network. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure. Thank you all attendants for being with us, and we wait for your comments, if any. And remember that if you are interested in specific aspects on modeling or other issues dealing with salinity, we will try to develop this in the activities of the network. Thank you, everybody, and let's meet in a forthcoming webinar. So have a nice